If you'd driven past my grandfather's old lakeside cabin that Saturday morning, you probably would have thought it was just a normal move-in day. A rental truck in the gravel driveway, car doors open, boxes everywhere, a woman carrying a laundry basket up the porch steps. You wouldn't have known it was my property. You wouldn't have known I hadn't invited any of them. My hands were still loose on the steering wheel when I turned the last bend in the road and saw the moving truck parked directly in front of my cabin, blocking the view of the water. For a second, my brain just stalled. I actually checked the address sign, as if maybe I'd somehow pulled into the wrong driveway. I hadn't. The front door was wide open. Strange furniture I'd never seen before sat on the porch. There were plastic storage bins stacked on the deck where my grandfather used to sit and drink his coffee at sunrise. And then I saw her. Amber, my husband's younger brother's girlfriend, belly rounded in a very obvious pregnancy under a faded sweatshirt, standing in the middle of my living room, cradling a box that said Nursery in black marker. Through the open door, I heard her laugh, bright and casual, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Babe, the crib pieces go in that room," she called out. "The one with the lake view. That'll be perfect for the baby." My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I slammed my car door harder than I meant to. Gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the porch, every step a mix of disbelief and anger. Two movers brushed past me like I was invisible, carrying a dresser inside. I caught a glimpse of my own furniture pushed awkwardly to the side, my grandfather's old armchair shoved into a corner like it was in the way. "Excuse me," I snapped, voice shaking. "What do you think you're doing?" Amber turned at the sound of my voice. For a split second, guilt flickered across her face, then smoothed into a practiced, guilty but hopeful smile. "Oh," she said, like we'd just run into each other at the grocery store. "You're here early. Finn said you probably wouldn't be up until tomorrow." She set the box down carefully, one hand on her back, the other resting over her pregnant stomach. "We didn't want to bother you with the details," she added sweetly. "We just thought it'd be easier if you saw everything once we'd already started settling in. That way you could picture it." Picture it. Her, Finn, their unborn baby, and her 3-year-old daughter Lily, living full-time in the lakeside cabin I'd inherited from my grandfather. And me? Apparently, I was supposed to just accept that my sanctuary had been turned into their new home. "I never gave anyone permission to move into my cabin," I said, my voice low and cold. "Get your things back in that truck, now." The smile slipped from Amber's face. Behind her, Finn stepped out of the bedroom hallway, holding a box labeled Kitchen, an infuriatingly relaxed grin on his face. "Come on," he said, as if I were the unreasonable one here. "Don't be like that. Jacob told you we were coming. This is going to be great for everyone." In that moment, with strangers walking in and out of the cabin my grandfather built with his own hands, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion, and it was only the beginning. If you want to understand why that cabin meant so much to me, why the sight of Finn's moving truck felt like a knife to the ribs, you need to know the history behind it. I'm 30 years old, work as a project coordinator for a mid-sized design firm, and grew up spending every summer at that lakeside cabin with my grandfather. He was a quiet man, gentle in ways most people never noticed, the kind of person who fixed things with his hands and healed things with silence. When I was a kid, he taught me to skip stones, to sand wood, to listen to the wind like it was talking to us. Back then, the cabin wasn't fancy. No polished floors, no new appliances, just the comforting smell of pine and lake water and old memories. 3 years ago, he passed away and left the cabin to me. Not my parents, not my siblings, not some distant uncle, me. He'd written one sentence in his will that I can still recite from memory, for the one who always saw it as home. So yes, the cabin is more than property. It's the only place in my life untouched by chaos, obligation, or other people's expectations, which is exactly why my husband Jacob and I turned it into our weekend refuge. We'd load up the car Friday evenings just after work, stop at the tiny roadside market for groceries, and spend 2 days pretending the world outside didn't exist. We fished, we read, we cooked breakfast together with the windows open, and Jacob always said the same thing when we left on Sundays: "I breathe better up here." Back then, I believed him. Jacob is 32, stable, dependable, a little too loyal to his family sometimes, but warm-hearted in all the ways that matter. He works in IT, comes from a small town only 30 minutes from the lake, and has a family dynamic I didn't understand until much later. And by family dynamic, I really mean Finn. Finn, 26, Jacob's younger brother, has spent most of his adulthood collecting failure like trophies. Dropped out of college twice, quit job after job, always had a new reason why life was unfair to him. Their parents, Carol and Dennis, never saw the pattern or chose not to. They handed him money, paid his rent, covered his car repairs, and called it helping him get back on his feet. But Finn never stayed on his feet. He didn't want to. I learned very early in my relationship with Jacob that his family revolved around Finn's crisis of the month. Birthday dinners cut short because Finn lost a job again. Holiday gatherings overshadowed by Finn's latest fight with a landlord or girlfriend. If there was a spotlight, Finn needed to be in it, and if he couldn't earn it, he took it. When he started dating Amber, a 24-year-old single mom with a sweet little girl and endless financial struggles, Jacob's entire family acted like he'd just rescued a stray puppy. They praised his maturity, his kindness, his growth, as if emotional stability could be declared, not demonstrated. The first time I met Amber, she seemed overwhelmed but kind. Nervous smile, apologetic tone, clearly exhausted from juggling a toddler, part-time work, and bills that probably kept her awake at night. But she also had this soft, eager look whenever Carol praised her, like she'd finally found a handler willing to take her side. I didn't dislike her. I just sensed she was desperate for a lifeline. And Finn, whose life was a sinking ship, was the last person who could give her one. So when Finn began making jokes at family dinners about how Jacob and I were wasting space by letting the cabin sit empty, I didn't think much of it. He always talked big, always fantasized about a better life he didn't plan to earn. But then the jokes became suggestions. The suggestions became pleas, and the pleas became entitlement. All while Jacob, uncomfortable and guilt-ridden, tried to keep the peace. Looking back, I realized something I should have seen sooner. Finn wasn't asking for help. He was laying groundwork, preparing his family, especially Jacob, for the idea that my cabin wasn't mine at all. Just something he hadn't moved into yet. The shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like water seeping under a door, quiet, persistent, easy to ignore until suddenly everything is soaked. It began with comments, always small, always wrapped in humor, but humor with teeth. At a Sunday dinner, Finn would gesture dramatically and say things like, "Man, must be nice having a whole lake house sitting empty except for 2 days a week." Or, "If I had that place, I'd make real use of it." Everyone laughed, except Jacob. He'd force a smile, but his shoulders stiffened every time. Then came the concerns. Fake sympathy, dressed as thoughtful observation. "Lily starts preschool soon. The schools near the lake are amazing, you know. Amber's neighborhood is getting rough. It's scary raising a kid there." And the worst part? Carol and Dennis soaked it in like he was preaching gospel. "Oh, the air is so clean up there," Carol would sigh. "Exactly what a growing child needs," Dennis would chime in. Meanwhile, I sat there, the owner of the cabin, listening to them talk about it as if it were a community resource waiting to be allocated. The tension began settling between Jacob and me too, subtle at first. He was quiet during the drives home, fingers tapping the steering wheel, jaw tight. I'd ask what was wrong, and he'd say things like, "I don't know. Maybe Finn just needs a break." A break from what? Responsibility? Reality? Consequences? But this wasn't just about Finn's habit of dreaming out loud. It became clear the moment Amber entered the picture. 6 months pregnant, struggling financially, living in a cramped apartment, it created a perfect storm of sympathy. And Carol adored her. She treated Amber like a fragile glass ornament she needed to protect. At family gatherings, Carol practically glowed whenever Amber talked about her pregnancy. "Oh, sweetheart, you need stability," she'd fuss. "A safe environment." And then her eyes would always shift toward me, as if my cabin were the obvious answer. I tried to ignore it. I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. But their behavior kept escalating. One Saturday morning, Finn and Amber showed up at our apartment unannounced. I opened the door, wearing pajama pants and holding a mug of coffee. They breezed right inside, acting like it was a social call. But within minutes, Amber said, "Can I see pictures of the cabin?" Her eyes practically sparkled when she scrolled through the photos on my phone, lingering on the loft bedroom, the open living room, the deck overlooking the water. She looked up at me with the expression of someone envisioning her future, a future that somehow included my property. Then Finn casually dropped, "Do you guys ever rent it out to family? Just a weekend here and there?" I said no, politely. He didn't hide his disappointment. Later that night, Jacob finally admitted that Finn had been calling him all week, asking, hinting, pushing. Jacob told me he kept avoiding the conversation because he knew I'd say no, because he knew I'd be hurt, because he knew what the cabin meant to me. That was the moment I felt the first crack inside our marriage. Not a break, not a fracture, just pressure. Like someone had wedged a wedge between us and was tapping it with a hammer. From then on, every gathering with his family felt heavier. Every laugh from Amber felt rehearsed. Every sigh from Carol felt pointed. Every silence from Jacob felt like distance. And I started to sense, deep in my chest, that they weren't just hoping for a yes. They were expecting one. They were planning on it. And I was the only one standing in their way. I should have seen the explosion coming. All the signs were there. The pointed comments, the guilt trips, the way Jacob flinched whenever his phone buzzed with a family member's name. But nothing prepared me for the moment everything snapped. It happened the night Finn and Amber ambushed us under the guise of dropping by. It was a quiet Saturday. Jacob and I had been planning a rare, simple morning together. Coffee, pancakes, maybe a walk around the block. He was still in pajama pants, hair messy, eyes soft and sleepy. For a moment, it felt like old times. Then the doorbell rang. Jacob and I exchanged a look, surprised, slightly annoyed, and he went to answer it. Finn stood there with Amber behind him, Lily on her hip, diaper bag slung over one shoulder. All smiles, all warmth, all pretense. "Hey, bro," Finn said brightly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Amber followed, breathless and glowing. "We were in the neighborhood, thought we'd say hi." It was a lie. Our neighborhood wasn't near anything of theirs. But before I could point that out, Amber was already cooing at our decor and asking if she could sit down. Within minutes, she shifted the conversation exactly where she wanted it. "I've heard so much about the cabin," she said, hands folded over her pregnant belly. "Do you have any pictures?" The way she leaned forward, eager, hopeful, it made me uneasy. But I didn't want to be rude, so I pulled out my phone. As she scrolled, her breath hitched. "Oh my God, Mike, it's beautiful." Her voice was reverent, like she was looking at a newborn baby instead of a rustic cabin with mismatched chairs and a deck that needed sanding. Finn took the phone from her. "Yeah, imagine Lily running around here," he mused. "Fresh air, space to play, better schools." Amber clasped her hands, eyes shining. It would change everything for her, for us. I felt Jacob tense beside me. And then Finn delivered the line that detonated everything. "So we were thinking, maybe we could stay there temporarily, just while we're getting back on our feet." I froze. Amber watched me with a hopeful little smile. Lily played with a toy car on the carpet, oblivious to the bomb her mother and Finn had just dropped. Jacob was silent, and that silence hurt worse than any accusation. I took a slow breath. "The cabin isn't available," I said carefully. "It's our retreat, and my inheritance. We don't host guests there." Amber's face fell so dramatically it almost looked rehearsed. "Oh, I just thought, for Lily's sake." Her voice trembled. Finn put an arm around her, squeezing her shoulder as if comforting her from a heartbreak I had caused. The emotional manipulation was so blatant it left my skin crawling. Finn didn't skip a beat. "Come on, Sarah," he said, my name sounding like a scolding. "We're family. Families help each other." "It's not about help," I replied. "It's about boundaries." He scoffed, leaning back like I'd said something offensive. "Boundaries? Seriously? When a child is involved?" And then he turned to Jacob. "Man, talk to her. You know how much we need this." Jacob swallowed, hard. That tiny hesitation, 1 second, maybe 2, was enough to shatter something inside me. Amber jumped in, voice shaking with emotion. "We wouldn't be a burden, I promise. Please, just think of Lily." Her hand slid protectively over her stomach, as if to remind me she was pregnant, as if her unborn child was also my responsibility. Like I owed them something. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. My palms were damp, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. They had backed me into a corner in my own home. "Finn," I said quietly, "the answer is no." His eyes hardened instantly. Amber blinked rapidly, tears forming. Jacob finally spoke. "Guys, we can't make decisions like this without talking it through." And that was the final spark. Finn stood up abruptly. "Wow, so she decides everything now? You can't even help your own brother without her permission?" Jacob's face flushed. "That's not fair." "You know what's not fair?" Finn snapped. "Having a sister-in-law who doesn't give a damn about family." Amber gasped softly, wiping a tear. "We just wanted a chance." The room spun with accusation, guilt, and unspoken tension. My voice was steady when I spoke. colder than ice. Get out. Finn stared at me like he couldn't believe I'd said it, but I didn't waver. Jacob rose slowly beside me, finally supporting me, but too late to stop the damage. Finn picked up Lily, grabbed Amber's bag, and glared at me with pure hatred. You'll regret this, he muttered. And then they walked out. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Jacob and I stood there, both breathing hard, both shaken. That was the moment the war truly began. The house felt suffocatingly quiet after Finn and Amber left. The sound of the front door closing echoed in my ears, and all I could hear was my heart pounding against my chest. I stood in the same spot, feeling paralyzed, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do. Jacob hadn't moved either. His gaze locked on the door as if hoping they would walk back in and apologize for the scene they'd just caused. But they didn't. Instead, we were left in this awkward, painful silence, with nothing but the unspoken weight of a decision neither of us had truly made yet. Jacob, I finally said, my voice small, strained. What just happened? He turned toward me, his expression torn, his lips parted, but no words came out immediately. He ran a hand through his hair, something he did when he was trying to process something difficult. I didn't know it would go that far, he said quietly, his voice thick with frustration and confusion. I didn't think they'd push so hard, Sarah. I thought they would back down. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him how unfair it was for him to have acted so passively, to have let them manipulate us into an uncomfortable position in our own home, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I felt this sickening lump form in my throat. It wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It wasn't about a request, a favor, or even about boundaries. It was about trust, about how Jacob, who had promised me time and time again that we were a team, had stood silently by while his family trampled all over me. I felt betrayed in the deepest way possible, not just by Finn, but by Jacob's unwillingness to fight for us. I don't know what to think anymore, I admitted, my voice quieter now, more vulnerable than I had intended. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I refused to give Finn or Amber the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I know this is hard, Jacob said softly, his voice almost pleading. He walked toward me, but I stepped back. The distance between us felt larger than it should have. You don't get it, Jacob, I said, shaking my head. You don't understand how it feels to have your boundaries ignored, to have your home turned into something everyone else feels entitled to, and you... I stopped myself before the words came spilling out in a rush. You just let them do it. You didn't say anything. Jacob's face tightened, and for a moment I thought he might argue, defend his actions, or apologize. But instead, he just looked lost. His eyes were searching mine, trying to understand the depth of what I was feeling, but it was too late. Do you understand why I said no? I asked, though the answer felt like it was already written in the tension between us. Jacob closed his eyes and nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I get it, I do. He trailed off, and I could see the weight of his own internal battle. I didn't want to cause a rift. I didn't want to make it worse between you and my family. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I making it worse? Was I pushing him into a corner where he had to choose sides? The thought gnawed at me. I didn't want to be the reason his family turned against him. I didn't want to destroy everything just to preserve my own peace. But there was something else at play here, something deeper, more fundamental. I'm not the one making it worse, Jacob, I said, my voice trembling now, but I held my ground. Your family has been pushing me for months, and I've been polite. I've been accommodating. But this is our space. I inherited that cabin. It's not a family project. And it's not a charity for Finn to take over whenever he decides he's had enough of his mistakes. Jacob stood silent for a moment, then took a deep breath. I know, he said, looking at me with an earnestness I hadn't seen in him in weeks. I do, and I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you. I should have done more. The admission, though painful to hear, was a small relief. It wasn't a solution, but at least it was a start. I wanted to believe him, to believe that things could go back to how they were before, when Jacob was on my side no matter what. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could trust him again, not after everything that had happened. I don't know if I can trust you to protect us from them, I said quietly, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can trust you to stand up for me when it counts. Jacob's eyes widened, and for a second I thought I saw the realization hit him. He stepped closer, but this time I didn't step back. I will, Sarah. I swear, I will. I'm not going to let this tear us apart. Not over a house, not over anything. I'll fix this. His words felt hollow, too empty for me to fully believe. Not because I doubted his love, but because I was scared. Scared of losing everything, because his family kept pushing, kept forcing themselves into our lives, and scared of how much I was willing to let go to keep our relationship intact. But more than that, I was scared of what would happen if this continued. If we kept ignoring the boundaries, kept allowing family to tear at the fabric of our marriage. And in that moment, I wasn't sure what was more painful, the thought of losing Jacob or the thought of losing myself in this fight. The days after that conversation felt like walking through a fog. I could barely remember the drive home after Jacob apologized. The cabin, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a place where conflict had settled deep into the walls, where every corner seemed to echo the pressure of what was happening between us. Jacob's attempts to make things right were slow. He called his parents a few times, explaining our decision. He even apologized to Finn on the phone, saying that I felt too strongly about the cabin to compromise. He made every effort to placate them, telling me he didn't want a family war, that he was doing this for us. But each time he returned home, after a conversation with his parents, I could see how deeply torn he was. I talked to Carol today, Jacob said one evening, his voice thick with frustration. She's still upset, but she's starting to see our point. I think she'll come around. I looked at him, skeptical. You think she'll come around? After everything that's happened, you really think your family is going to let this go? He didn't respond immediately, his gaze turning inward. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to make everyone happy, to keep his family intact while also protecting what was ours. And it hurt me more than I cared to admit that he seemed more concerned with their feelings than with mine. The pressure was unbearable. A week later, things took a more aggressive turn. Carol called me, directly, early one morning, her voice tight with tension. I know you're upset, Sarah, she said, her words clipped. But we're family, and you're making a huge mistake. Finn and Amber need help. You know how difficult things have been for them. How can you stand by and let them struggle when you have all this space? I stood in the kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, disbelief spreading through me like ice. Carol, I've told you. The cabin is not for rent. It's not a solution for Finn and Amber's problems. It's my home, my inheritance. And I won't let it be used as a crutch for your son's failures. She didn't back down. But you can't just keep it all to yourself. It's not right. Your grandfather would have wanted it to be shared with family. Her words struck me like a slap across the face. You don't know my grandfather, Carol, and if you did, you'd know he built that place for peace, for solitude, not for you to take over when it's convenient for you. The silence on the other end was thick, suffocating, and then Carol's voice came through, cold and stern. Family means sacrifice, Sarah. You're being selfish. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, trembling. How had it come to this? How had our marriage become a battlefield between my boundaries and their expectations? Later that evening, as we sat at the kitchen table, Jacob came back from another tense conversation with his parents. The exhaustion in his eyes was undeniable, but so was the frustration. Carol called again today, he muttered. She said she's done trying to convince you, that you're being unreasonable, that we're being selfish. Selfish? I whispered, incredulous. We're being selfish. They're the ones who won't take no for an answer. They're the ones who refuse to respect our space, our marriage, our life. Jacob's voice softened. I know, Sarah, I know, but they're family. I can't just cut them off. I can't do that to them. His words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I didn't understand his position, but because I didn't know what it meant for us. What did it mean if we were standing on opposite sides of this? If the people closest to him could override my needs, my wishes, so easily, what did that say about our relationship? I shook my head, frustration spilling over. I feel like I'm losing you, Jacob. You're letting them control us, and you're letting me take the fall for it. He looked at me, the pain in his eyes clear. It's not like that. I'm trying, Sarah. I'm trying to make peace without sacrificing what we have. But in that moment, I realized something. We were no longer in a relationship where compromise meant meeting halfway. This was about survival. Survival of my peace, survival of my marriage, and survival of my identity. Over the next few days, Jacob became increasingly withdrawn. His parents continued to pressure him, calling daily with new arguments, new guilt tactics. Carol began to include me in the calls less and less. Instead, she spoke directly to Jacob, questioning why he wasn't standing up for what was right, for family. It was clear they had sided with Finn, even after everything. And then Finn took things further, much further. It happened on a Tuesday morning when I got home from work to find a letter waiting for me in the mailbox. It was from Carol and Dennis. They were filing an official complaint against us. Apparently, they had gathered signatures from several extended family members, people I hadn't spoken to in years, arguing that we were being cruel and unreasonable. They were demanding we reconsider allowing Finn and Amber to move into the cabin. Jacob didn't know about the letter until later that evening when I handed it to him. His face went pale as he read through it. The letter painted me as the villain, the one standing in the way of family unity, of helping his brother. His family had gone too far. "I'm done, Jacob," I whispered. "I can't do this anymore." The look in his eyes shifted. He was no longer angry or confused. Now he looked resigned. It wasn't just that he was torn anymore, it was that he was worn out. The pressure, the guilt, the constant demands from his family had drained him. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I feel like I'm losing both of you." I didn't know how to respond, because in that moment I realized something too. I was losing him too, not to Finn, not to Carol, but to compromise. Our marriage had become a game of negotiation, not love. And that was the scariest realization of all. There's a type of quiet that doesn't soothe. It suffocates. And that was the silence Jacob and I lived in during the days that followed. He moved through the apartment like a man carrying too many weights. I moved like someone trying not to break. And between us, between our words, our looks, our breaths, was the growing echo of something neither of us wanted to admit. This could destroy us. Every night, Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone long after I had turned off mine. Every morning, I woke up earlier than usual, just to avoid the tension of sharing the same space. The cabin had always been our refuge, the place where our relationship felt most real, where we were closest, happiest, most ourselves. And now, it was the very thing tearing us apart. I felt alone in a way I hadn't felt since childhood, alone even with someone sleeping beside me. The worst moment, the point where everything inside me cracked, came 3 nights after receiving the letter from Carol and Dennis. Jacob was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the coffee table. Carol, Susan, his aunt, Finn. A group text flashing one manipulative message after another. He didn't pick it up, but the buzzing didn't stop. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly over my chest, watching the man I loved falling apart under the weight of a family that refused to let him breathe. "Jacob," I said softly. He lifted his head but didn't look at me. His eyes were red. He hadn't been sleeping. "I don't know what to do anymore," he whispered. "I feel torn in two. If I choose you, I lose them. If I choose them..." His voice cracked. "I lose you." The words sliced straight through me, because he wasn't wrong. I walked slowly to the couch and sat a few inches away, close enough to feel the heat of him, far enough not to crowd him. "I don't want you to choose between us," I said quietly. "I've never wanted that. I just want you to choose us, to choose our boundaries, our peace, our life." He rubbed at his temples. "They're my family, Sarah. They've been there my whole life. And I'm your wife," I said gently. "I'm supposed to be your family too." His eyes snapped up, hurt, defensive, guilty. "You are. You know you are. Then why does every battle end with me alone on one side and all of them on the other?" My voice broke despite my efforts to hold myself together. Why am I the one who has to justify my own property, my own inheritance, my own choices? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. And in that moment, something inside me shattered, quietly, invisibly, but completely. I got up and walked toward the bedroom. He didn't follow. The darkness of the room wrapped around me like a blanket, but it wasn't comforting. It was cold, heavy, merciless. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a pillow to my chest as tears finally spilled over. Not loud sobs, just breaking. Breaking for the cabin, breaking for the betrayal, breaking for the way Jacob couldn't seem to fight for us unless forced. Breaking because I realized I wasn't just battling his family anymore. I was battling Jacob's guilt. And guilt is a much more loyal opponent than any manipulative brother or overbearing mother. When Jacob eventually came to bed hours later, he didn't touch me. He didn't speak. He just lay beside me, staring at the ceiling as if counting the cracks. I lay awake, staring at the wall, wondering if this was the beginning of the end. The lowest point came the following morning. I was getting dressed, pulling a sweater over my head, when Jacob finally whispered, Maybe letting them stay for a few weeks isn't the worst idea. My hands froze mid-movement. I turned to stare at him. He looked defeated, like a man who had already surrendered, not because he agreed with his family, but because he was exhausted from fighting them. That's how it starts, I whispered. A few weeks turns into months, months turn into years, and suddenly they're living in my cabin permanently. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, I continued. And once they move in, Jacob, I'll never get them out. You know that. You know that. He shut his eyes, exhaling slowly. I just want the pressure to stop. The words hit me harder than anything Finn had ever said. He wasn't trying to fix this. He wasn't trying to protect us. He was trying to make the pressure go away, even if it meant sacrificing me. I felt something deep inside my chest go completely still. A numbness that felt worse than pain, worse than anger, worse than betrayal. It felt like acceptance. Acceptance that our marriage was no longer safe. Acceptance that Jacob had been slowly slipping away. Acceptance that I was now fighting this war alone. That was my darkest moment. And for the first time, I wondered if the cabin would be all I had left. Sometimes the shift doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. Sometimes it's a slow alignment, an accumulation of truths that finally snap into place. For me, the turning point began with an instinct, a gut feeling so sharp it woke me early on a Friday morning. I needed space, real space. Not the suffocating apartment with vibrating phone screens and whispered arguments, not the tense silence of Jacob's guilt. I needed the one place that had always steadied me, the cabin. So I packed a bag, sweaters, jeans, a notebook, coffee, and left a note on the counter for Jacob. I need time to think. Please don't call unless it's an emergency. Then I drove. The deeper I went into the woods, the calmer I felt. The air grew clearer. The leaves shimmered in the kind of gold you only see in late autumn. My chest loosened. My breathing steadied. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself. But peace lasts only until reality catches up. I pulled into the driveway, expecting quiet. Instead, I saw tire tracks in the dirt. Fresh ones. My heart lurched, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a delivery truck or a forest maintenance vehicle. I tried to push it aside. But the tracks wouldn't leave my mind. I spent Friday night on the deck, watching the colors fade across the lake. The air was cold enough that my breath floated in front of me. I sipped wine, wrapped myself in a blanket, and let the silence settle into me like medicine. By Saturday morning, I felt stable enough to start untangling everything in my head. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out my notebook. Page 1. What do I want? Peace, boundaries, self-respect. A marriage where I am not the enemy. A partner who defends us without hesitation. Writing it down made it real, made it undeniable. Page 2. What is actually happening? Jacob is overwhelmed by guilt. His family is escalating their demands. I am being painted as the villain. Finn and Amber are growing more entitled. My boundaries are being trampled. My cabin is not safe. Halfway through the list, my phone buzzed. A message from Jacob. Mom says she wants to talk calmly. Maybe you should meet her for coffee. I stared at the message. My turning point wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, internal click. No more. No more meetings where I was ambushed. No more guilt packaged as family concern. No more bending until I broke. I typed back. No, I'm done negotiating what is already mine. Before I could overthink it, I turned off my phone. It felt like ripping out an IV of anxiety. I took my coffee outside, inhaled the sharp scent of pine, and repeated out loud. This is my cabin, my decision, my life. But the universe wasn't done testing me. By late morning, a small silver car appeared at the end of the driveway. My stomach tightened instantly. It was Carol's car. She didn't get out immediately. She sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the cabin as if contemplating her next move. My jaw clenched. Everything in me wanted to hide inside and pretend I wasn't there. But I was done being cornered, done being passive, done letting their narrative become the truth. So I stepped outside. Carol flinched slightly when she saw me. She got out of the car slowly, moving with the dramatic heaviness of someone preparing for a performance. Sarah, she said, voice trembling with forced gentleness. We need to talk. I crossed my arms. Make it quick. She inhaled deeply, as though she expected me to be emotional, volatile, unreasonable. But I wasn't any of those things. I was focused. Amber is devastated, she began. Lily has been crying. They were counting on this. That's not my responsibility, I said calmly. Her eyes widened at my lack of guilt. Family supports each other. Support does not mean surrender, I replied. Her mouth tightened. Your refusal is creating a divide in this family. No, I said evenly. Your demands are. For a moment, she looked stunned. Maybe she had expected me to crumble. Maybe she thought isolation would scare me into agreeing. Maybe she didn't realize how much strength grows in silence. Then she said something that solidified everything inside me. If you just gave in for a little while, everyone could have peace. Peace. They kept using that word like it meant obedience, like it meant silence, like it meant giving up pieces of myself until nothing was left. I stepped closer, my voice steady and cold. I'm done sacrificing myself for your peace. Carol stared at me, and for the first time, I saw it, the truth behind all her words. She didn't want fairness. She wanted control. She wanted the cabin. She wanted obedience. She wanted me to disappear into Jacob's family structure until I no longer had a voice. But I wasn't disappearing. Not anymore. Without another word, she turned and got back into her car. The gravel crunched under her tires as she backed up, then sped down the road. I exhaled slowly. My turning point wasn't when she arrived. It was when she left. Because in that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't scared of them anymore. And that terrified them. Fallout has a strange rhythm. It doesn't explode all at once. It cracks, quietly at first. Then the fractures widen until the whole foundation gives out. For Jacob's family, the cracking began the moment Carol drove away from the cabin without the victory she'd come for. I didn't know it yet, but while I stood strong on that porch, she was already reshaping the story into something that painted her and everyone else as the victims. By the time I returned home Sunday night, the narrative had spread through their entire extended family like wildfire. Jacob met me at the door, his face pale, his posture defeated. "They're furious," he said before I even stepped inside. I removed my jacket slowly. About what? Me not handing over my property because they declared they wanted it? His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "They think you disrespected my mom, that you humiliated her." I stared at him, speechless for a moment. "Jacob, she ambushed me at the cabin. She showed up uninvited to pressure me." "I know," he said quickly. "I told them that. But they don't care. They're saying—" He hesitated. "Say it," I demanded softly. "They're saying this is your fault, that you're the reason the family is falling apart." I let out a breath that trembled despite my best efforts to stay composed. Not because I believed them, but because Jacob's voice cracked when he said it. He was absorbing the blow meant for me. The escalation became undeniable on Monday. Finn showed up at our apartment building. He waited inside the lobby like a man preparing for battle. When I walked in after work, he stepped directly into my path, blocking the row of mailboxes. His expression was a blend of desperation and anger, the look of someone who expected the world to fix itself around their needs. "We need to talk," he said. "I don't think we do," I replied, trying to move past him. But he shifted to block me again. "You don't understand what you're doing to us," he snapped. "Amber's been crying nonstop. Lily asks every day when we're moving to the lake. Do you know how cruel it is to let a child get excited and then tear it away?" My jaw clenched. "I didn't promise you anything. You assumed. That's not the same as an agreement." He leaned closer, his eyes cold. Family shouldn't need permission to help each other. I stepped back, pulse rising. "You're not entitled to my home." That's when he said the line that confirmed everything I had feared about his intentions. "My dad said your grandfather would be ashamed of you." The words hit me like a punch, not because they were true, but because they were so deeply manipulative, spoken like a weapon designed to wound a very specific part of me. I forced my voice low and steady. "You don't get to use my grandfather to guilt me into giving away something he entrusted to me." Finn scoffed. "Jacob only defends you because you control him." My breath froze. He took my silence as permission to continue. "You twisted him against his own family. You're just scared we'll make better use of that cabin than you ever did." That was the moment I realized. Finn didn't want help. He wanted possession, claim, control, ownership. And he was willing to trample anyone, including Jacob, to get it. I walked past him, refusing to give him another second of my time. As I reached the elevator, he called after me. "You'll regret this." I pressed the close button, heart pounding but mind strangely clear. This wasn't just entitlement, this was escalation. The backlash hit Jacob next, hard. That same night, he received call after call from Carol and Dennis. "You hid behind your wife. You abandoned your brother. You embarrassed this family. You let her call the police on your own blood." Jacob paced the apartment like a man unraveling. Each accusation carved deeper into him. By the time the last call came in, he was shaking. "When did they call the police?" I asked, my voice stunned. He ran a hand through his hair. "When they tried to move into the cabin, and you confronted them. Carol says we should have let them stay until things cooled down." I stared at him in disbelief. "They were trespassing." "I know that," he whispered, "but they refused to accept it. That was the problem." Acceptance required accountability, and Finn had never been held accountable a day in his life. Then everything collapsed. 2 weeks later, Amber left Finn. The engagement crumbled under the weight of their fantasy life falling apart. She packed Lily's things, moved out of state, and returned to her parents. Finn spiraled, blaming everyone but himself. Carol and Dennis tried to hold the family together, but every conversation fell apart the same way, with them refusing to acknowledge the truth, and Jacob finally refusing to lie. One night, after yet another argument with his parents, Jacob returned home looking exhausted but clearer. He sat beside me on the couch, took my hand, and said in a voice both steady and broken, "I'm done letting them use my guilt to control me. I see them now, Sarah. I see exactly what they've been doing to us." For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders lower, not because the war was over, but because Jacob had finally stepped to my side of the battlefield. The fallout landed hardest on the people who caused it. Carol and Dennis alienated half their extended family when they shared their twisted version of events. Finn became isolated, consumed by bitterness. Amber cut ties permanently. The family reputation fractured. And all of it, every consequence, was a direct result of the choices they made. Not mine, not Jacob's. The truth stood unshaken, even as everything around them fell apart. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt the faint beginnings of something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Healing didn't come all at once. It wasn't a sunrise moment, or a dramatic epiphany, or a sudden surge of strength. It came in quiet, steady layers, like ripples across the lake at the cabin I fought so hard to protect. The first layer came when Jacob chose us, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because he finally saw the truth. He saw the manipulation for what it was. He saw how guilt had been weaponized against him, and he saw how much he had risked losing before he caught himself. "I'm sorry," he said one night, his voice soft but unwavering, "for not standing up sooner, for making you feel alone. You were right, Sarah. You were right the whole time." And hearing those words, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt understood, seen, safe. The second layer came when we rebuilt what had cracked between us, not through grand gestures, but through small ones, honest conversations over late-night tea, long walks where we talked about boundaries, trust, and the kind of marriage we wanted to protect moving forward. He attended therapy sessions with me, not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to grow. The third layer came from reclaiming the cabin, not just physically, but emotionally. I changed the locks, installed cameras, refurbished the deck my grandfather once sanded by hand. Jacob painted the porch railing with me one warm afternoon, and when he wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, he whispered, "I breathe better up here again." So did I. As for his family, they drifted farther and farther away, but not because we pushed, because they refused to face the truth. Carol and Dennis still host holiday dinners where Finn plays the victim and my name gets spoken like a curse. But Jacob no longer bends under their disappointment. He no longer carries burdens that don't belong to him. He no longer sacrifices our peace to maintain their illusion of a perfect family. And strangely, I don't feel angry anymore. I feel free. Finn's life unraveled by his own choices. Amber left. Their imagined future crumbled. And the cabin, my grandfather's legacy, remained right where it belonged. Through everything, the lesson became painfully clear. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Not even family, especially not family. And boundaries, real, firm boundaries, aren't walls built to keep love out. They're doors with locks meant to protect it. My marriage didn't end because of this battle. It transformed. It hardened where it needed strength. It softened where there was room to grow. It became something built intentionally, not inherited by default. And as I sit here now on the cabin deck, watching the water ripple under the afternoon light, I understand something I didn't before. Sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's the only way to keep the things and people you love from breaking beyond repair. This cabin didn't just survive the conflict. I did.